Good afternoon. Welcome to this breakout session about reading data available from the Early Childhood Longitudinal Studies. It's also known as ECLS. Our speaker today is Joe McCarroll of the Institute for Education Sciences. My name is David Hoff. I've been supporting the NAEP program's communications outreach efforts for the past 8 years as a leader of the Hager-Sharp team. I'm here to moderate this session and facilitate the question and answer periods following Dr. McCarroll's presentation. Feel free to ask your questions using the chat function during the presentation. Dr. McCarroll is the study director for ECLS and serves as the point of contact for data users' inquiries about the study. She has authored several reports based on the study's data. Dr. McCarroll received her doctorate in child psychology at the University of Minnesota's Institute for Child Development. The title of her presentation today is Reading Data Available from the Early Childhood Longitudinal Studies. Dr. McCarroll has taped her presentation in advance and will be available to answer your questions once the recording has finished. She has provided a resource document that includes ECLS staff contact information, as well as web addresses and citations referenced in the presentation. Thank you for joining us today. Now let's hear from Dr. McCarroll.
Welcome. My name is Jill McCarroll, and I'm the study director for the Early Childhood Longitudinal Studies. Today I will focus on the information about reading that has been collected through the Early Childhood Longitudinal Studies, or ECLS, program. After providing a brief overview of the ECLS studies and the reading-related data collected by each, I'll discuss some of the resources available to either see what research has been conducted with the data or explore the data for yourself. As my focus is on data available to the public for secondary analysis, while all are welcome in the audience, I expect that this presentation will prove most relevant to researchers and others with a data science focus. For more than 20 years, the National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES, has been collecting information about children's early education experiences and outcomes, including their reading knowledge and skills, from the earliest ages as part of the ECLS program. Our first ECLS study, called the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study, Kindergarten Class of 1998-99, or ECLSK, focused on children in kindergarten in the 1998-99 school year. At the time the ECLSK began, no large national study focused on education had followed a cohort of children from kindergarten entry through the elementary school years. Some of today's commonly known information about young children, such as the information about early literacy and numeracy skills shown here, comes out of the ECLSK. For example, we all know that children arrive at kindergarten with varied knowledge and skills, but the ECLSK was the first study to show at a national level that this was the case, and to provide the statistics to show the differences in children's knowledge and skills by various background factors. Thus, the ECLS data are an important point of comparison for what students, teachers, and administrators are seeing and experiencing at the local level. Do those local experiences mirror the national patterns or differ? If so, why? The national level data collected in the ECLS studies can help answer those questions. This presentation focuses on reading information because that is the focus of this conference. But the reading data represent just a small portion of the data available for analysis in the Early Childhood Longitudinal Studies. The studies are designed to provide comprehensive and reliable data aligned with some shared study goals. All of the studies collect data that can be used to investigate the ways children are prepared for school, both at home and in any early care and education settings. Also, the studies allow for investigation of the association of early educational experiences with child outcomes over time. The multifaceted data collected across the years allow researchers and policymakers to study how various child, home, classroom, school, and community factors at various points in children's lives relate to cognitive, social, emotional, and physical development. The ECLS program includes 4 longitudinal studies. I'll provide an overview of the 3 existing studies, which were all completed pre-pandemic, with the final round of data collection for the most recent study completed in 2016. The 4th ECLS study is currently in development and so will not be covered in today's presentation. The first ECLS study that I'll discuss was actually the 2nd ECLS program study conducted. However, it is our first and only birth cohort study. Called the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study Birth Cohort, or ECLSB, it is the only current ECLS study that includes data collections prior to children's entry into kindergarten. It is a study of children who were born in the United States in the year 2001. The ECLSB data, which focus on children's health, development, care, and education during the formative years from birth through kindergarten entry, can be used to make statements about the cohort's children as they aged over time. The frame from which the study sample was drawn comprised birth certificates of children born in calendar year 2001. Data collection centered around a visit to the children's homes, during which a trained field staff member conducted a child assessment and a parent interview. The first home visit occurred when the children were about 9 months old. Subsequent home visits occurred when the children were about 2 years old, preschool age, and in kindergarten. Multiple methods were used to collect information from multiple sources. Data were collected from the children through direct assessments, including ones assessing reading knowledge and skills. For example, one of the reading-related assessments involved audiotaping the children retelling stories that had been read to them. Data were also collected from both mothers and fathers. A face-to-face interview was conducted with the parent respondent, who was usually the mother but was sometimes the father. In addition, separate hard copy self-administered questionnaires were used to collect information from both resident and non-resident fathers. Videotapes of structured parent-child interactions were also made during the home visit for the 9-month, 2-year, and preschool collections. Telephone interviews were conducted with children's non-parental child care providers, and observations were made of the care settings of a subsample of children. When children were in kindergarten, data were collected directly from their teachers using a hard copy self-administered questionnaire. Information about the children's schools was compiled from other NCES data sources. While much of the data collected by the study may be interesting given today's focus on reading, I'll focus now on just a subset of the data. The ECLS studies have literally thousands of variables, so I couldn't possibly highlight all of the ones relevant to reading today. A hallmark of the ECLS studies is the inclusion of the direct child cognitive assessments. For reading in the ECLSB, at 9 months and 2 years, the study included assessments of the children's language and communication development. Beginning with the preschool round, the study directly assessed children's reading skills and knowledge. In those later rounds of the study, the ECLSB included a language screener as part of the assessment to ensure that children had adequate English language skills to take the study's assessments in English. Only a small number of children did not pass the screener. This was due to the very low level of English required to pass it. Data collected from the parents included child and family demographics, as well as reports of home activities, including many related to reading and literacy, such as how often the child was read to and how often the family told stories to the child. Care and education providers reported both on the study children's development and on the learning environment and teaching practices experienced by children while in their early care and education setting. For example, the providers reported on the study child's reading and language activities, such as how often the child worked on learning the names of letters, learned about conventions of print, or worked on phonics. The care setting was described in terms of learning materials, such as whether the setting contained a reading area with books. Also, providers answered questions about their beliefs regarding children's preparation for school, including their agreement with the belief that children who begin formal reading and math instruction in preschool will do better in elementary school, and whether most children should learn to read in kindergarten. Finally, in the kindergarten rounds, teachers reported on the study children's development, school programs, and educational goals and objectives. For example, teachers reported on the frequency that various reading and language arts skills were taught, and the use of ability groups for reading instruction. Some of the same items were asked of teachers as were asked of care and education providers, such as items asking about kindergarten readiness beliefs and questions about room resources, like a reading area with books. Earlier, it was noted that data from the Eclsk confirmed that, at a national level, children arrived at kindergarten with different levels of knowledge and skills based on their background characteristics and experiences. The Eclsk allows us to examine those experiences prior to kindergarten. For example, when the Eclsk children were infants and toddlers, a modified version of the Bayley Scales of Infant Development was used to assess children's cognitive development or mental skills. Results from the Bayley showed that while the majority of children between 11 and 13 months of age were babbling, about 5% of them were using words. Data such as these can serve as a benchmark for practitioners evaluating children's knowledge and skills relative to other children of the same age. The next ECLS program study I'll discuss is the Eclsk. The Eclsk is a study of children who were in kindergarten in the United States in the 1998-99 school year. It began in that school year with a sample of more than 21,000 children and their families, attending more than 1,200 public and private schools. Data collections occurred in both the fall and spring of that first year, which is referred to as the base year. Subsequent data collections occurred in the fall and spring of first grade and the spring of third, fifth, and eighth grade. A nice feature of the study's periodicity is that by including both a spring kindergarten round and a fall first grade round, the Ecls data can be used to study changes in children's skills, abilities, and knowledge over the summer. As such, Ecls data have been used to study summer learning. I'll talk more about the research in this area later in my presentation. Like the Eclsk, the study includes data collected from multiple sources at multiple points in time. Information was collected from the children, their families, their teachers, and their schools, though the specific respondents in each round of data collection varied. Also like the Eclsk, the Eclsk includes a huge amount of data on children's reading achievement and associated factors. In terms of data collected from the children, the Eclsk included direct child cognitive assessments, including ones on reading, at all study rounds. The Eclsk assessments were designed to measure knowledge, skills, and development at particular points in time, as well as growth across time. The purpose of the cognitive assessments was to measure a broad range of important knowledge and skills, representing what is typically covered by schools' curricula for the particular grade of interest. Just like the Eclsk, the design of the Eclsk was to be as inclusive as possible, capturing assessment information from a diverse national population of children. Thus, Eclsk procedures were developed to accommodate children with varying needs and abilities, such as children with disabilities and those from homes in which English was not the primary language spoken. From kindergarten through fifth grade, the assessments were administered one-on-one by a trained assessor using a visual stimulus shown to the children in a spiral-bound book called an easel. An image of an Eclsk reading easel is shown on the screen here. Easels like this were also used to administer the Eclsk's child assessments in that study's later rounds. In the 8th grade collection, groups of Eclsk students who attended the same school were assessed in a single proctored paper and pencil group administration. The flow chart on screen shows the children's pathway through the early rounds reading assessment. In the kindergarten and first grade data collections, a brief language screener called the Oral Language Development Scale, or OLDS, was given to those children whose home language was not English according to their schools. The screener determined if children understood English well enough to receive the direct child assessment in English. Children who achieved at least a minimum score on the language screener received the full Eclsk direct assessment battery in English. Children who did not achieve the established cut score received a reduced version of the Eclsk assessments. Spanish-speaking children who did not achieve the cut score on the English OLDS or administered a Spanish version of the Olds, as well as other study components translated into Spanish. Children whose primary home language was not Spanish and who did not achieve at least a minimum score on the language screener did not participate in the child assessments at the round in which they did not achieve the minimum score. The Olds was not administered beyond first grade because most children had passed the Olds by the spring first grade data collection. In addition to direct child assessments, the Eclsk has parent reports at every round of data collection. The volume of data collected is huge, so like I did with the ECLSB, I'll highlight just a subset of the reading-related data that are available. For instance, parents reported on their child's characteristics, including any disabilities. They also reported about home activities and the home environment. For example, how often the family read books to the child and the number of books in the home. Teachers completed surveys at every round of Eclsk data collection as well. They reported on the study's children, including reports on the child's perceived interest and competence in reading and the child's approaches to learning. Teachers also completed surveys about their own characteristics in their classrooms, for instance, reporting on their reading instructional practices. Special education teachers also completed child and classroom level surveys if they instructed a study child with an individualized education program, or IEP, in place at the time of data collection. Next, the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study, Kindergarten Class of 2010-2011, or Eclsk 2011, is the Eclsk's sister study. Coming more than a decade after the inception of the Eclsk, the Eclsk 2011 allows for cross-cohort comparisons of two nationally representative kindergarten classes experiencing different policy, educational, and demographic environments. For example, significant changes that occurred between the start of the Eclsk and the start of the Eclsk 2011 include the passage of No Child Left Behind legislation, a rise in school choice, and an increase in English language learners. The Eclsk 2011, like other studies in the ECLS program, utilized a longitudinal design to provide nationally representative information collected from multiple sources over time. The target population of the Eclsk 2011 consisted of children in kindergarten in the United States during the 2010-2011 school year. The Eclsk 2011 base, or kindergarten year, included a sample of more than 18,000 children attending more than 900 public and private schools. Data were collected from and about these children at multiple points, from the fall of kindergarten to the spring of 2016, when most of the study children were in 5th grade. Just like the Eclsk 2011 collected data from children and their families, teachers, and school administrators. The Eclsk 2011 also collected information from the children's kindergarten before and after school care providers. Like the Eclsk, respondents provided information about children's cognitive, social, emotional, and physical development, and information was collected about children's home environment, home educational activities, school environment, classroom curriculum, teacher background, and before and after school care. While some of the data collection rounds for the Eclsk 2011 match that of its sister study, the Eclsk, you'll notice that the Eclsk 2011 included more rounds and was conducted at all grades from kindergarten to 5th. There were both fall and spring rounds for the first 3 school years included in the study. By comparing the spring kindergarten and fall 1st grade, and the spring 1st grade and the fall 2nd grade data, there are now even more opportunities than available in the Eclsk to investigate questions of summer learning. Data collection components for the Eclsk 2011 mirror that of the Eclsk, with the exception that the study also included a before and after school care provider component in the kindergarten round. Like in Eclsk, the Eclsk 2011 included direct child cognitive assessments in reading at all study rounds. Again, the purpose of the cognitive assessments was to measure a broad range of important knowledge and skills representing what is typically covered by schools' curricula for the particular grade of interest. The assessments were one-on-one administrations using assessment easels in all data collection rounds. In the fall and spring kindergarten rounds, all children were administered the Eclsk 2011 language screener as the first component of the assessment, regardless of their home language. This is unlike the screener for the Eclsk, which was only administered to children who were identified by the school as having a home language other than English. The level of English language knowledge and skills that was needed to pass the screener and allow the child to be assessed in English was lower for the Eclsk 2011 than what was required for the Eclsk. There are also some differences in the items that were administered in the screener between the two studies. In the Eclsk 2011, for children whose home language was English, the screener primarily served as a warm-up or practice for the rest of the assessment, since the items were of low difficulty. However, the screener's primary purpose was to determine whether the children understood English well enough to receive the full direct child assessment in English. The routing path for kindergarten is illustrated on this slide. Children whose home language was not English according to school records and who did not achieve at least the minimum score on the language screener were administered the first 18 items of the reading assessment after the screener. These 18 items, along with 2 from the screener, are called the Eclsk 2011's Early Basic Reading Skills, or EBRS, items. The EBRS items were primarily letter recognition and letter sound items, with a few phonemic awareness, vocabulary, and word reading items. Once the EBRS items were administered, the cognitive assessments in English ended for children who did not achieve a minimum score on the screener and whose home language was not English according to school records. The EBRS items provide enough information to obtain a reading assessment score for students that discontinued the assessment at this point. The inclusion of the EBRS in the Eclsk 2011 allows us to have a reading assessment score for all students, even those who did not pass the screener, which was not the case for the Eclsk. Spanish-speaking children who did not achieve at least the minimum score on the screener were then administered a short reading assessment in Spanish that measured Spanish early reading skills, as well as the rest of the assessment, for example, math items, that had been translated into Spanish. The Spanish Early Reading Skills Assessment, or SERS, consisted of 31 items from the English reading assessment that had been translated into Spanish. The items measured letter identification, letter sounds, print familiarity, and simple vocabulary. The SERS was not designed to be a measure of Spanish proficiency. Rather, it provides additional information about Spanish-speaking children's basic language skills in their home language. Keep in mind that in addition to the SERS score, Spanish-speaking children who completed the Spanish assessment also have an English reading assessment score as they completed the EBRS items. In the first grade data collections, the screener tasks were administered only to children who spoke a language other than English at home who had not passed the screener in the most recent round in which they were assessed. Since most children achieved a minimum score on the screener in the spring of first grade, it was not used after that round of data collection. In addition to direct child assessments, the Eclsk 2011 has a wealth of parent and teacher reported data. Many of the items are exactly the same as those included in the Eclsk in order to facilitate cross-cohort comparisons. As noted earlier, in some of the earlier grades, the kindergarten studies included data collections in the spring of one grade and the fall of the following year. This provides a unique opportunity to look at summer learning, including summer learning activities, among young students at a national level. NCES staff published a short report called A Statistics in Brief using Eclsk 2011 data about children's experiences in the summer after kindergarten, examining how those experiences varied by children's socioeconomic characteristics. Figure 7 in the report shows that about 46% of children were read to by a family member every day in a typical week during the summer, compared to 32% who were read to 3 to 6 times per week, 20% who were read to once or twice a week, and 2% who were never read to. Differences were found for children coming from households of different poverty statuses and with parents with different highest levels of education. For example, a higher percentage of children from non-poor households were read to by a family member every day compared to children from poor households. The report also examined how often children looked at or read books on their own during the summer after kindergarten. 4% of children had parents who reported that they never looked at or read books on their own, while 33% of children were reported to do so every day during the summer. Here, too, some differences were found by household poverty status and parental education. For example, larger percentages of children whose parents had a bachelor's degree or higher were reported to read more often each week compared to children whose parents had a high school diploma or below. I hope the brief overview of the 3 existing Ecls studies has led you to become interested in either seeing what research has been produced using the datasets or using the data for your own analyses. The next section of my presentation will provide some additional examples of how the Ecls data have been analyzed and provide you with information on how you can review what others have done or access the Ecls data for yourself. The possibilities for conducting reading-related research using the Ecls are numerous and varied, as is the currently available published literature base. To search for such research yourself, you can use the search function on the NCES Publications and Product page to search for publications released by NCES. Searches can be limited to publications produced using Ecls data by choosing that option in the Survey Program Area field. Most of the more recent NCES analyses of Ecls data have been published in compendium reports that are released on a regular basis. This slide presents data showing the relationship between student risk factors at kindergarten entry, specifically poverty and low parent educational attainment, and academic achievement in early elementary school. This was published in the 2017 edition of the Condition of Education. The Condition of Education is a congressionally mandated annual report that provides information in an easy-to-understand format on policy-relevant topics that are of interest to a broad audience. Using data from the Eclsk 2011, these analyses show that poverty and low parent educational attainment are associated with lower academic achievement in reading in kindergarten through grade 3. Students who were living in poverty and who did not have a parent who completed high school tended to score lower on the Ecls reading assessment over each of their first 4 years of elementary school compared to their peers who had neither risk factor at kindergarten entry. A second annual report released by NCES that features data from the Ecls is the Digest of Education Statistics. The primary purpose of the digest is to provide statistical information covering the broad field of American education from pre-kindergarten through graduate school. Data in the digest are presented in tabular format. The Eclsk 2011 data on reading outcomes shown in this snapshot from a 2019 digest table are relevant to an issue that has been of particular interest to both parents and educators, the age at which children start kindergarten, in particular redshirting or delaying entry for a year or more past when children are age eligible to begin. The table focuses on differences in assessment scores across elementary school for children who started kindergarten early, started kindergarten on time, had a delayed entry into kindergarten based on when they were age eligible to start, or who were kindergarten repeaters. This is a snapshot from another Eclsk 2011 table from the 2019 digest, this time showing data on first-time kindergartners' reading scores as the students progress through the various grades in the study by selected child, family, and school characteristics measured in the kindergarten year. Here we see the reading score differences for the cohort's children over the kindergarten through 5th grade period by child sex, age of the child at kindergarten entry, and child's race ethnicity. To find research using NCES data that has been published by researchers external to NCES, you can use our online searchable bibliography. The bibliography tool allows you to search for journal articles, doctoral dissertations, and other research publications that use NCES data. The tool is very easy to use. On the bibliography homepage, just enter your search term or terms and mark whether you'd like to search based on titles or abstracts or both. Then, to limit your search to just publications using ECLS data, choose ECLS as your data source. I recently conducted searches using the NCES bibliography tool and the NCES publication site. Hundreds of articles have been published using ECLS reading data. What I'm about to show you is just a small preview of what's available. Running a search on reading gaps, I found an article that uses modeling techniques to investigate achievement gaps. Another article explores the correlates and moderators of reading achievement gaps in the earliest grades. Last on this slide is a work that investigates the differences between reading, math, and science gaps at the national level. A report out of NCES using Eclsk data estimated the degree to which specific aspects of teacher training and teaching experience were associated with student achievement, including gains made in reading over the course of the kindergarten year. After that is a citation for a dissertation that looks at possible ways to improve reading achievement and reduce achievement gaps in first grade. The third report listed on the slide includes analyses of children's reading knowledge and skills by background characteristics using Eclsk 2011 data. Our next citation is for a report conducted outside of NCES that investigated how classroom context and access to effective teachers relate to observed reading achievement gaps in first grade. It is followed by an Eclsk publication that investigates children's gains in reading over their first 4 years of school, from the start of kindergarten to the point when most children are finishing third grade. The report also describes children's achievement in reading at the end of third grade, both in terms of their overall achievement and in terms of their specific reading knowledge and skills. Finally, the last study cited on the slide looks at gender gaps in reading achievement in both elementary and middle school using Eclsk direct assessment data and teacher ratings. Earlier, I highlighted an NCES report on summer learning. A search in the bibliography tool shows that many researchers have used Eclsk data to investigate this topic in depth. Noted on this slide are investigations of social class differences in summer learning, the effect of family investments in reading disparities in the summer months, and racial, that is Black-white, summer learning gaps. In addition, analyses have been conducted on seasonal academic achievement by socioeconomic status and race ethnicity, as well as summer library use by socioeconomic status. Other work has looked at changes in test score gaps and the timing of the changes in these gaps. Research conducted by others can be an important resource for practitioners interested in seeing how their students and their own experiences compare to others around the country, or who are considering whether to implement a policy to address an issue of concern in their system. However, it may be the case that existing research does not address an issue in a way that is exactly aligned with your needs. This last section of the presentation discusses how to obtain Eclsk data to conduct your own analyses. As a first step, you'll want to determine whether the Eclsk has the data you need. To learn more about the data collected in each study and consider if you'd like to analyze any of the data for yourself, a good place to start is to view the study questionnaires. With the exception of child assessments, all of the study data collection instruments are available online for researchers to review the exact question wording, though there is a small set of items asked within the instruments that are not available publicly due to copyright restrictions. Overview descriptions of the instruments are available on our study website, as well as detailed descriptions in the study's users manuals and psychometric reports. If you'd like to obtain the data to analyze for your own purposes, Ecls data files are available to the public free of charge. There are two types of files. Restricted use files contain the most detailed information. Note that we do not include any individually identifying information, such as name or social security number, on the files. Rather, the files are restricted use as there is a concern that the variables, when evaluated in conjunction with other information on the file, could potentially lead to identification of an individual with sophisticated data mining methods. These files also contain information that someone may consider sensitive. If you're interested in the restricted use files, please visit the website on the screen for more information. These files are distributed to researchers with a restricted use data license, and the licensing process is described on this website. Our other files are public use files. These are derived from the restricted use files. However, data masking techniques have been applied to certain data values to further minimize the potential for a respondent to be identified. The public use files for the Ecls are posted directly on our website and can be downloaded from there. Today's audience would probably be interested to know that the Ecls data related to reading proficiency and instruction are generally not disclosive and therefore available on the public use files. However, all Eclsb files are restricted use files. If you will be working with the Ecls files, I'd suggest viewing our free online data trainings. There are training modules to introduce data users to the NCES studies and datasets, as well as modules specific to each of the Ecls studies. While most often viewed by those interested in analyzing the datasets, there is ample detail about the studies and instruments themselves that would be of broader interest. I'll close my talk today with time for questions. However, if you have any questions after today, please feel free to reach out directly to me, Jill McCarroll, or contact our full study team at the general Ecls mailbox. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jill. That was a really thorough overview. I certainly learned a lot about Ecls and not just what it is, but how it's used. I'd encourage people, if you have a question, please put it in the chat box. I have a few questions that I'm going to start with.
Great.
So Jill, you referenced a bunch of websites and citations. Many citations, actually. Is there a way someone can get a list of those?
Absolutely. So there's a resource handout that's associated with today's presentation. That'll have my contact information and the general Ecls contact information in case you have questions after today's presentation, but it also includes all of the websites that are in my presentation and all of those references. So if you are interested in doing your own search of other publications using Ecls, there's the bibliography search tool or the publications and product page, or you can just pull the citations that I covered today in today's presentation off that resource document.
Okay, great. Now, there's another round of Ecls starting soon, which you mentioned. So is that going to collect information about students' reading achievement as well?
Absolutely. So one of the hallmarks of all of our Ecls studies is the direct child assessment portion of the study. So the next Ecls study will follow another kindergarten class, and it will include reading assessments. So we had initially planned to do a study following the kindergarten class of 2022-2023 with a field test that would have started later this year. But due to COVID, we've decided to delay the study a year. That means our next Ecls kindergarten class will be the kindergarten class of 2023-2024, or the Eclsk 2024. Much like I talked about in the presentation with the Eclsk 2011 being designed to be very similar to the Eclsk in order to facilitate cross-cohort, the Eclsk 2024 is designed to be a sister study to both of those two prior studies. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to have 3 cohorts now of kindergarten students that experience different educational environments, different demographic environments, different environments. You can compare all 3 of those cohorts. In order to facilitate that, we're planning on including a lot of the same items. In addition to having reading assessments in all 3 studies, we'll probably have a lot of the same parent-reported information about children's reading knowledge and skills and resources in the home. A lot of the information I talked about in the presentation. We'll also be talking to teachers again in that study. So again, teacher-reported information, indirect assessments of children's reading knowledge and skills, as well as resources available to the students in their classrooms and the types of reading and instruction that students are receiving in the classrooms. In a lot of ways, the new study is going to be very similar to the prior studies. There are some differences. For example, the rounds in which we're going to collect data will be slightly different. The new study will have fall and spring kindergarten collections, and then spring collections in first grade, third grade, and fifth grade, which means we're going to be finishing up in the spring of 2029. So be on the lookout. We release data along the way for a study. So we'll release a data file that has just the kindergarten data. So you don't have to wait until 2029 or later to get all of the information from the study, but we'll do periodic releases along the way for our new cohort.
I mean, it may be too early to ask this question, but do you think that someone who is a researcher could compare reading achievement from this new version back to the 2011? And is that something that you think would be a valuable question to ask of the data?
Definitely. So one of the things we do is include assessment scores that are designed in a way that you can actually compare them directly between the two cohorts, different cohorts. So we're actually developing those right now for the Eclsk and the Eclsk 2011. We'll be releasing a file that has scores specifically for that purpose. And then we'll be doing the same thing with the new cohort, releasing scores that will allow you to directly compare the reading scores. So you can really see changes across the cohorts and how children are doing in reading achievement.
Yeah, and you could, would there be ways to look at certain factors that may drive that change?
Absolutely. So that's something about the Ecls is we have a ton of contextual information. I didn't talk a lot about that in my presentation because I really did focus in on the reading data that are available, but we collect information. We have direct assessments in other domains such as math, such as science. We also include information on children's socio-emotional development and their physical development, a lot of information about their home environment, a lot of information about their school environment. I talked about parent and teacher reported data, and then obviously the child assessment component, but we also collect information from school administrators. So there'll be that same component in the new study as well. So you can look at all of this really rich data that gives you a complete picture of children's lives and use that information to help explain the differences that we see in reading scores and the differences we see in reading scores over time across the cohorts.
Yeah, so you see lots of things that could correlate with the changes.
Definitely.
Yeah. So the study that you're about to embark on, well, a couple of years from now, you'll be embarking on. I mean, is that going to be? You talked a little bit about this. It's going to be similar in some ways. What are the ways that it might be different?
Sure. So one of the main reasons it's going to be different, one of the main ways it'll be different is with some different data collection rounds. All of our studies so far have included different rounds of data collection. The Eclsk went from kindergarten through 8th grade, but had the different rounds spaced out quite a bit. The Eclsk 2011, we had 6 rounds of data collection in 3 years. We did fall and spring collections for the first 3 years of children's schooling. The new study is going to space out the rounds a little bit more. A little bit less frequent data collection rounds. We're also always interested in asking items that are policy relevant and look to answer questions that might not have been as prevalent or as large of an interest to researchers when the other studies were launched. So now with the Eclsk 2024, even before COVID, something we wanted to focus on in the new study was some questions about technology use in children's homes, technology use in children's schools. Now post-COVID, this will be our first cohort that's entirely collected hopefully after COVID years. We'll be looking at technology use in schools and be able to see what is different now. Any other types of emerging types of research questions, for example, between Eclsk and Eclsk 2011, there was a lot of interest in executive functioning. So now we had an addition of executive functioning measures in the Eclsk 2011, and we're going to include some of those in the Eclsk 2024. So this will be the first opportunity to look at changes in children's executive functions across 2 cohorts, since we didn't really include that information. For example, direct child assessments in executive function in the Eclsk. So definitely some new additions, some new exciting constructs to be looking forward to, additional detail and additional questions on policy relevant questions and issues that have come up.
We have a question in the chat box from Elaine Lee, or Lai. Will there be any overlapping with the overlapping sample between the Eclsk and NAEP, the NAEP programs?
Good question. So if you look at the years in which NAEP is administered, a fourth grade round was something that we had in both the Eclsk 2011 and NAEP. With the Eclsk 2024, we don't have a fourth grade round of data collection. So we don't have that overlap where we could concurrently collect data at the same time. At present, there's not a plan to collect data to provide an overlapping sample. For example, we could look at third grade Eclsk 2024 and then the NAEP scores in a different year. We also have to look at how those calendars overlap, right? Since NAEP isn't collected every year. So I guess the short answer is no, unfortunately, not at the current time. There isn't that plan for an overlapping sample, but we never say never. We always are looking forward to new opportunities and new data collections for our studies. So it was a good question and something definitely.
That is a good question. And it's many years down the line, right? Before
exactly
that decision needs to be made. But it would be an interesting thing if it were possible.
Yep, definitely.
I'm sure the researchers would jump all over it. We are at time, but I just wanted to see if you could explain briefly, our ECLS ends at 8th grade. Are there other NCS longitudinal studies out there that go beyond that?
Yep, NCES has a longitudinal surveys branch, and we collect information all the way from birth through post-secondary. So one of our richest programs is our longitudinal studies of high schoolers. We've been collecting reading and English language arts data on high schoolers every decade since the 1980s. And so there's a lot of rich data there to look at reading score information and course taking information across those cohorts. You can examine within a cohort of high schoolers as well as across the cohort of high schoolers, and you can include outcome data such as high school completion, post-secondary education, and early career experiences. In addition to the high school studies, our most recently completed study in the longitudinal surveys branch at NCES is the middle grade longitudinal study of 2017-2018, or MGLS 2017. This is a study that was representative of students in the U.S. in 6th grade in the 2017-2018 school year. It had data collections at 6th grade, and then again 2 years later when most students were in 8th grade. That data collection is somewhat interesting because it happened in winter, spring of 2020. We all know what happened in early 2020.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so those data at this time have not yet been released. I don't have release information for them yet, but keep your eye on the IES listservs as well as the MGLS homepage that can be accessed through NCES's website for more information about that study.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jill. This has been extremely informative, and I'm sure people out there in the research community really appreciate it. So.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for attending today.
Okay, thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.